The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Family Business Center's webinar on the Family Business Board and outside directors. We're excited that you could be with us this afternoon for the next hour to just talk about boards and the role of outside directors on the board. Before we get started, just wanted to touch base about the dialog box and how to ask questions. On the right-hand side of your screen, you should have a dialog box that has a box called Chat. If you would like to submit a question throughout the program, you can type a message in the chat box and hit send, and we will get it on our end, and we will then respond to questions. If we can, we'll respond to them as they come up. If not, we will try to get through all the questions at the end of the webinar. So thanks again for joining us. Let's see. There we go. So today, we're going to talk about the role of the board in family business governance, so setting some context about the role that the board plays in the overall system of family business governance. We're going to talk about the role that independent directors play in adding value to the family business. We're going to talk specifically about the preparing family board members a little bit to get you a sense of the difference between a family director and an independent director. And finally, we'll stress some of the importance of communication between the family and the board. Before we do that, I want to just highlight a couple of upcoming dates for the Family Business Center. September 7th through the 9th, we're launching our 6th class of the Family Business Stewardship Institute here at the Schreiber Center in Quinlan School of Business. October 15th, we're going to have a great celebration of 25 years of history of the Family Business Center. We're going to have some of our families and staff members from the early years joining us for the gala dinner on October 15th. And then, of course, our Illinois Family Business of the Year Awards will be November 16th at the Four Seasons Hotel. Hope you can join us for all of those, and information on those can be found on our website. All right, so ownership, unity, and family cohesion is our greatest advantage as a family business. Now, maintaining ownership, unity, and family cohesion may sound easy, but it's not. Obviously, keeping the family on the same page, keeping management on the same page, so on and so forth, can be a challenge at times. And so if we're to leverage this unity and family cohesion, we need to have governance that helps us find the balance between family, ownership, and management. Because sometimes what happens in family businesses is the family system dominates. And if the family system dominates, typically we're getting too caught up in family fights, family drama, and we're not talking about the things that we need to be talking about in the ownership and management circles. If the ownership circle dominates, typically we're taking too much money out of the business, not meeting the needs of the business, and we're really just focusing on the financial aspects of ownership, and that at the detriment of the family relationships and the health of the business. And if we focus too much on the management system, maybe we're not paying attention to important family dynamics that may distract us from our goals and objectives as a family. And one of the things we know about from our research is that if you want longevity in a family business, that it can't be just about money. We need to have the right balance between the financial rewards as well as the emotional rewards in the family business. So how do we balance these three circles in the management system and the ownership system? The answer is governance. We develop governance mechanisms that help provide alignment with the family, the employees, the management, within the family, within the management, and within the employees. And so thinking about governance is important. And well, we're going to talk about independent directors. We're going to start by just giving you an overview of the common elements of family business governance. So when we're talking about organizing and aligning the family, there are a variety of ways that we typically do that. We do that with family meetings, having a family council, having a family assembly of all the shareholders when we have large shareholder groups. But these are organized processes that have clear agendas that keep the family aligned about what is our role in the business, what is our role and what we expect of each other as family members, and what do we financially expect from our investment in this business. And that can often be one of the touchy subjects, is we often get a disconnect between the family members working for the business and the family members that don't work for the business. And a lot of that is around education and expectations. And hopefully having regular family meetings can educate people about their roles and help to mitigate some of that disconnect. In the business system, we typically have a board of advisors or board of directors, which is the subject of our webinar today, talking about the role of independent directors and helping us make the important business decisions that we need to make in overseeing management and providing accountability. And on the ownership system, we may have shareholder meetings or a family office that help us organize the tax, trust issues or distribution issues surrounding ownership in the family business. What we found over years of research is there are 3 keys that are always correlated with successful transition in family business. And if you think about them, they're all processes that create alignment in the family management, employee base, and the stakeholders of the organization. So family governance, meaning the family meetings, the family council, etc., provides alignment in the family. The board aligns the family with the management and provides accountability to management for achieving the high-level objectives that the family has for the business. And when we're talking about the family's objectives for the business, we're not talking about the operational micromanagement type of objectives. We're talking about the high level. What businesses do we want to be in general? What kind of risk are we willing to take on with our investment? And what kind of financial return do we want as a family from our investments? Those are the high level areas where families get involved in the conversation. The board works with management much more around the concrete operational strategies, creating a strategic plan that aligns with what the family wants. And of course, strategic planning aligns those within the organization on goals and objectives within each of the employees' positions. So these are the 3 things that are always correlated with successful transitions in family businesses. So what does some of the research say? You know, it's great for us to say boards are important, boards help us, etc. But let's look at the science behind it. And when we look at some of the largest family businesses across the world, what we found is that 90% have a board of directors of the largest family businesses around the world. And 90% of those families have regular family or shareholder meetings to discuss the important business issues. So governance is important if we look at the largest family businesses around the world, and healthy communication between the family and the business is important as well. When we interviewed family businesses, 85% of the CEOs who put a board in place said it was their single best management decision that they made. Often being a CEO, especially of a family-owned company, can be a very isolated place. We feel like we're supposed to have all the answers, and often we don't. So how do we deal with that? How do we deal with the real challenges that the business is facing and have a sounding board to work through issues and challenges? Because most of the people in the organization are looking to us for the answers, and we may not have those. So having a board in place can be a sounding board, a support, and an additional accountability mechanism for us as leaders. We know that the research says that having outsiders on our board increases the value of the company. Interestingly enough, the occupation of the board member is not correlated with that, but families that have outsiders on their board increase the value of their company. Typically, it's an indicator that the family realizes that we don't know everything. We know a lot of things about our business, but having some objective outside folks take a look at our business can help us increase the value and performance of our business. Another thing, and this may be a surprise to some, but family businesses have the highest rate of internal fraud of any kind of corporate form. So outside directors decrease the risk of internal fraud using corporate resources for inappropriate benefits or inappropriate uses. So it's a check and balance in the governance system. So when you have management with no board, who do they really answer to, and having somebody to answer to often is helpful from an accountability standpoint. And of course, boards really help with succession and keeping succession on the front burner. One of the members of the center once said to me, this is a few years after the transition with his father, but he said one of the greatest services our board did for us as a family was that in every board meeting they walked in and they asked my dad, what's the status of the succession plan? And finally my dad got tired of not having an answer to that question, and he started working to figure it out. So just having outsiders at the table that continue to provide accountability and ask the hard questions is important. We also know that family cohesiveness generates better financial returns for the business, and that cohesiveness can predict as much as 35% of the variance in your return on equity. So if we don't have governance systems that provide transparency and trust in the governance of our organizations, family unity can slip and wane. And when we're thinking about family members on the board, less than 12% of families do anything or have a formal training program to prepare their family board members for service. So how effective can our board be as an accountability mechanism if our family members aren't prepared to serve on that board? And preparation for board service is important, whether you're a family member or not. So also in surveying our membership, we found that of those families that have boards, over 80% say it's valuable or very valuable. So over 50% say the board has been very valuable to them, and these are those with outside directors. So just a little more research to support the importance of those outside directors. So what's the role of our family business board? And in a little bit we'll talk about the role of the independent outsider. The role of the family business board is to provide accountability to management for articulating and achieving a vision and strategy that's consistent with the values and mission set forth by the family. So if you think about this, going back to the family governance question, if our family is not clear and consistent about what we want from the company, whether that's from a values perspective in terms of how we want to act, how we want to behave, how we want to position ourselves in the marketplace, or what we expect of the company, then it's much harder for management to be accountable to that the family vision for the company. So that's just a plug for the importance of the family governance side and why the family governance side is so important in maintaining family unity. Now the board's responsibility is making sure that the strategic plan and the vision that the management team puts together for the future of the company is aligned with the family's desires for the business and the family's relationship with the business moving forward. And also to be a source of accountability to the family, to push back against the family and help them understand sometimes when maybe their expectations are unrealistic or there are kind of flaws in the family plan. But if you think about the core purpose of the family business board as being accountability, that helps us when we get into the board selection process to say, who is best positioned to provide accountability to management? Sometimes that's not a family member, and it is more likely to be for a non-family member to hold management accountable in an objective way. So what do we mean by accountability? Here's one definition, which is doing what you say you will do when you're going to say you're going to do it to the level of quality that can be reasonably expected. So the board pushes management to be clear about doing what they say they're going to do to the level of quality that can be reasonably expected. And management's responsibility is to let the board know as soon as possible when they're not going to be able to meet expectations and help the board understand why those expectations aren't being met. So when we think about this in the classic governance model, accountability on the family side is handled by the family council. So the business of the family is typically handled by the family council, and if you've got significant assets outside the business, you have a separate family office that manages those assets and then acts as a liaison with the family members across family branches. And while in this model we do highlight family branches, again, thinking in family branches often emphasizes the divide in our family, and we should be thinking about thinking as one family rather than family branches, because if we're thinking in family branches, we're typically only thinking about what's good for our family branch, not what's in the best interests of the whole, which will be more divisive in the long run. So cultivating that sense of unity and how our family branches form together to form one family. Now, the board of directors is the primary governance body on the ownership side of the family business. So the shareholders elect the board of directors. Now, this can get very complicated in a family business where you've got a network of trusts where the voting stock may lie. So you may have trustees voting the board of directors. Sometimes those are family trustees, some of those are non-family trustees. And understanding our ownership structure and how the board of directors is elected is important, because that is the primary role of the shareholders. The shareholders typically elect the board of directors. They act on the sale of the company, major acquisitions or divestitures within the company, but for the most part, they're at a very high level and not dealing with the day-to-day. That doesn't mean they shouldn't know what's happening in the company at some level, and that's often where the board can be a conduit to make sure that the shareholders are educated about the challenges of what's happening at the board level. So then the board of directors may have standing committees. Maybe there's a family employment committee. Typically, you'll also see audit committee, governance committee, nominating committee, those types of committees. And you can craft a charter for almost any committee to meet the strategic challenges that your business is facing at any point in time. So typically the board in larger families that have family councils, the boards will be liaisons with the family council to be sharing that knowledge and information about the company, in addition to providing accountability to the management team. So I have one family that I work with that has said, oh, as an owner, you can go to any meeting in the business anytime. And that really blurs the line between family and business, and really that's not the role of an owner. The role of the owner is not to attend operational meetings. Again, it's to elect the board of directors and at a very high level decide what's our level of risk that we're comfortable with, what businesses do we want to be in, and at a certain level, what kind of return on our investments do we think. I mean, you can think about that in the context of you own ownership in a public company. Do you get to go to operational meetings in a public company if you own shares in a public company? No, you don't. So having a clear boundary between management, employment, and ownership and family is an important thing. So the board is that governance mechanism that oversees the business side of things. So if we were to look at this at another level, ownership, our values are around stewardship, and we may have more detailed values about the expectations for behavior of the people involved with our organization. And our job as owners is to ensure the growth and survival of the company and make sure that it's a healthy company reacting to and planning for the challenges that it's facing. So it's more of an oversight body that elects the directors to be their agents within the company. The board also is responsible for stewardship, but helping the family find that family business balance between family ownership and management. Again, the core job is accountability, and their job is also to select the CEO and provide oversight to the CEO and the management team. then the management team is responsible for living up to the values, providing leadership to achieve the strategy that is put together by the management team, and manage the enterprise and ownership to those board standards. And then, of course, that will provide clarity and direction for all the people in the organization and the employees to perform to achieve those goals and objectives. So it's in a family business, it's very easy when you play a role in perhaps all three of these systems. You may be an owner, you may be a board member, you also may be in management. It's hard to know what hat am I wearing at a certain time, and how do I manage that balance, and when I'm sitting at the boardroom, not think as a management person and not think necessarily just about my own individual interests as an owner. Because at the board level, I have a fiduciary responsibility. If we have a full fiduciary board, we have a full fiduciary responsibility to all the shareholders of the company. And in some areas, there's more and more emphasis on the board's responsibilities to employees and the other stakeholders of the company as well. So we can't just think in our own self-interest at the board level. We have to think in the best interest of all, because that's the role of the board. So the board should monitor the strategic execution. Number one, make sure that there is a strategy that the management team has articulated, have regular check-ins with the board, and benchmark the strategic performance against the long-term goals. Now, one of the most common issues I see in family businesses is how clear are we about our long-term goals? It's often easy to think about our short-term goals and what we're trying to accomplish with our short-term goals, but it's often harder to think about the long-term goals, especially with the pace of change that we've been experiencing recently. How do we make sure that we have long-term goals? And because the easy thing to say is, well, we're never going to know what's going to happen 10 years from now. So why plan for it? Why not focus on the time frame that we have a more reasonable understanding of what's going to happen, which is, anywhere from 1 to 3 years typically when you're talking to a management team. And I try to get them to think differently from the perspective of using the analogy of a flight plan. If any of you who are pilots out there know that when you're a pilot, you're required to file a flight plan. So I'm intending to fly from Chicago to San Francisco. I'm intending to fly at this altitude, at this speed, etc. So that gives air traffic control your flight plan. Now, best laid plans of mice and men, I get up in the air as a pilot and I encounter weather. I encounter storms, I encounter turbulence, maybe I encounter mechanical problems in my plane. I have to alter my flight plan. So my point being that we need a flight plan. We need to kind of have an aspiration for where we want to be 5, 10, 15 years from now. Some families even look longer, look a generation out, 25 years. What do we want the company to look like? That doesn't mean we don't change the plan as it goes, but the board's role is to make sure that there is a plan, both short-term and long-term, and help management identify the obstacles to achieving that. And also evaluate the strategies. There are a lot of people out there that say that the board needs to be intimately involved in the creation of the strategy. Now, the one downfall to that is if I create the strategy, it's much harder for me to be objective about that strategy because I have skin in the game. I have ego in the game. So the more deeply board members are involved in the creation of the strategy, the harder it is for them to be objective in evaluating the strategy. So the board needs to absolutely understand the strategy and evaluate it and approve of it, but they don't want to be so ingrained in the strategy that they feel like it's their baby, because it's going to be much harder for them to be objective and critical of it where they need to be moving forward. So another important role I mentioned before is that the board has a role in succession. Now, this is where independent outsiders can be very helpful, because often parents have a very difficult time being objective when evaluating their own kids or their nieces and nephews. We've got emotional skin in the game. We don't want to offend. We don't want to hurt. And there may be long-standing family patterns that we don't want to address when we're thinking about the succession process. So if you've got directors who are family sensitive, meaning they understand the importance of the family and the family's role to the business, they can absolutely be helpful in selecting a successor and helping the family ask, what kind of leader does our business need for the future? And what are the skill sets, both from a tactical perspective, operational skill sets, whereas also personal characteristics in terms of values, integrity, leadership skills, presence, all of those things. What does the business need in terms of where we want to be 5, 10, 15 years from now? What kind of leader do we need to get there? And that's often different than the leader that we needed to get to where we are today. So the board can help in being an objective voice in, number one, creating a process to select a successor that's good for both the business and the family, and selecting that successor. So, one of the things we hear from successors is that I don't get good feedback from my parents about my performance. I either get sugar-coated feedback, overly harsh feedback, or no feedback at all. And that goes often for other people in the organization, because people are sometimes concerned about whether this person is going to be my boss at some time. So having independent outsiders on your board that can help provide real-time feedback to your successors about their growth and development, and collaborate with the management team to get that feedback to your successors can be an invaluable role that the board plays. And just the fact that the board's there asking the question is also important. The board can help communication between the family and the business. Sometimes when a family member relays information, it can be seen in an emotional way because of who that person is, maybe what they did to us at some point in the past, maybe the role that they've played in the family throughout the years. So having people outside the family can actually take some of the emotion out of the communication between the board, between the business and the family. So the board approves the committee and search process for the successor, and also helps to put together crisis plans. So oftentimes the family will put together a committee that will lead the search process for the successor and also work on a crisis plan, and then that committee will report back to the board. When you have independent outsiders involved in any decision-making process, whether it's selecting the successor or selecting a strategy, having qualified, credible outsiders involved in the conversation adds credibility to that selection of the successor or the selection of a strategy. But the main job of the board is to make sure that succession is planned for and that it will happen in a timely fashion. Now, that's not to say boards aren't different. Boards evolve over time. So the board in a startup business is going to be very different than the board you're going to need in a Cousins consortium or later stage family business, because the needs of the business are different. When you've got one shareholder, the board will be much more focused on the business. As you get more and more family members involved, having the board understand that intricate and emotional relationship between family members and the business is important. I get directors all the time that come from public companies, and they enter into a family business, and this is one of the dangers of independent outsiders, is that if they don't have any sensitivity to the family issues, they may be destructive. So when you're thinking about independent directors, you want them to have a sensitivity that the family plays an important role for the company, and they don't take the role that many public company board members play when they come into a family business, which is, if we can just take the family out of the business, we'll be okay. If the business can just operate, quote unquote, professionally, implying that if a family member is running a business, it's not professional. If we could just run the business professionally and keep the family stuff out of it, everything will be okay. And the problem with that is that those directors often treat the family as the enemy, and then the family starts to fulfill that prophecy because they start to feel untrusted and uninvolved, and etc. So we want directors who understand that an educated and unified family is the best possible partner to the board and the business moving forward. And understanding where are we in the board evolution phase, that in the founder-owner stage, independent directors may be helping them start to plan and prepare the next generation and make sure that they're giving the founder-owner feedback about whether the successors are ready and how to prepare them. In the sibling partnership moving to cousin consortium phase, those independent directors may be much more involved in communication with the family council, and so that independent director role evolves as the business and the family evolves as well. So let's talk a little bit about family versus non-family directors. If we go back to the question of accountability, that leads us to the critical question of who will the CEO listen to when we're talking about a family versus a non-family director. So if a family member is going to be on the board, are they qualified, credible, and will the CEO listen to their input and advice? And if we don't have any criteria for a family member about their participation in the board, it's much less likely that the CEO is going to listen to that person. And in the same vein, a non-family member must also be qualified, and they must also have experience that the CEO will respect and allow that director to influence them as the CEO. So if you're going to have family member, most families have family members on the board. In fact, I think the average number of non-family on most boards is about 3. There are families who have a majority of outside directors, but if you're going to have family members serving on the board, typically it's because they can vote themselves on because of voting rules in the bylaws or in their ownership structure. If family members are analytical, have relevant business experience, have relevant business contacts, and often have a high degree of family trust. So sometimes when there's a fracture in family unity and there's some level of distrust, having a family member serve on the board who has a level of trust with the family can actually be a very helpful thing, even if maybe their relevant business experience isn't quite up to speed. Now, it's not ideal. Ideally, you'd like all directors to be able to contribute on all levels, but the reality is, even on public company boards, each director brings unique experiences. Some bring more technical experience, some bring more leadership experience and knowledge of the company. So finding that right mix of board members is important. So when we looked at the composition of member boards of directors, about 90% of the membership had family members who were employed by the company on their boards. About a little over 70% had family members who weren't employed by the company. About 35% had employees who were not family members who served on their board. And we were happy to see that about 75% of our members have independent directors on their board, because as we know from what I talked about, the research is the presence of independent directors, while not the silver bullet, the research says that it has a positive impact on the value of the company and the accountability of management. So when thinking, going back to that question of the family director, here are some models for family director involvement. So one, they're professionally qualified. They have a specific set of skill sets and they're as qualified as outside directors, and we want that to draw that in. That's kind of like the ideal family director. They're professionally qualified and they also have the trust of the family and the benefit of being a family member. Many families often have resulted, because of unresolved communication issues, with a branch representation. We serve to represent the branch and make sure that the branch's voice is present at the table. And that doesn't always mean that they have the business qualifications. In situations like that, I think we need to be asking the underlying question is, what is it in the family communication and the background that has us to the point where we feel like we need to have somebody at the table to represent our branch? It means that there's probably some sort of tear in the fabric of trust. And long-term, well, branch representation may be a short-term solution. The long-term solution is to try to get behind why is there a lack of trust and how can we repair that trust. And then, the final archetype of a family director is somebody working for the company, and that's my qualification for serving on the board. So when thinking about non-family directors, they have, some would argue, a very unenviable job sometimes, in that they get caught in family dynamics sometimes, and if they don't have some level of emotional intelligence, they can often make some family dynamics worse. So when we're recruiting non-family directors, we want them to understand the importance of family unity to the long-term health of the family business, and that if we alienate or ostracize certain parts of the family, the chances are that group of the family is going to come back and ask for liquidity at some time, or create a conflict that distracts us from running the organization. And the more we treat them poorly, the more likely it is that they're going to come back to haunt us. So that even as a non-family director, we have to be attentive to making sure that the family is planning for and addressing family unity, family communication. And as non-family directors, we are often tasked with providing some of that communication with the family. That many of the things that we're talking about are not just business issues, that many of them have, many of the issues that we talk about have emotional impact. So a dividend in a family business is not just a financial question of what the business can afford. It has emotional impact in terms of the financial well-being of family members, and can impact the communication. We may still end up with the same answer, but we have to understand the financial or the emotional impact of some of these business decisions on the family dynamic. Now, they don't have to be family psychologists. Hopefully, if we have good leadership in the business and good leadership in the family, the non-family directors are just conduits that provide objectivity in the sharing of information. But at the end of the day, we want our directors to be productively challenging. So not just disagreeing to disagree, but somebody who's willing to stand up and disagree with the other directors on certain issues where they have a belief that something's getting missed. And one family I've talked with has what they call the horse's ass award. So in an effort to try to encourage directors to challenge the assumptions of management, each meeting they give an award that kind of recognizes somebody who was productively challenging. That doesn't mean I'm a jerk and I'm putting people down and trying to criticize. It's that I'm asking the important questions that challenge our assumptions and make sure that we're doing the right thing, that we're aligned with shareholders and the management team, and that we're all moving in the same direction. So when we're searching for a non-family director, the most critical qualification is do they have the capacity to hold the company accountable and have the discipline not to interfere in operations? So that's often a very fine line. So the director, unless there's a crisis in the company where we've lost the CEO or the company is about to go bankrupt, directors don't get involved in the day-to-day operations of the company. They get information on that, and they develop processes where they monitor the performance of the business, but they're not interfering in the day-to-day operations. The management team, they have to have a level of trust in the management team to achieve that objective. So when we're thinking about directors, we want people who have that discipline to hold management accountable, hold their feet to the fire, and the discipline not to get too deep into the weeds and think, I know everything, and so I'm just going to solve this problem for them. So when we're looking at those non-family directors, we want to make sure that they don't have conflicting relationships. They're not working for a competitor. They're not doing something that would present a conflict of interest to their performance on the board. We want them to be objective and thinking only about the best interest of the shareholders and stakeholders of the company, not their own self-interest. So this connects to compensation. If you have a director who's in it for the money, then they may be reticent to give you their full opinion because of their fear of losing their board fee. And that's not truly objective information or opinion. We want every director to be willing to walk away from the table if they don't feel like management is adequately addressing the important issues of the company. So we don't want those conflict of interest. They should be critical thinkers. They should be able to have their own opinion and not just go along with what management says. Sometimes management has what we call groupthink. They have their beliefs, and there's a type of bias that we talk about in the psychology world called confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when we have an opinion, we often only look for data that supports our opinion, and we discount data that is contrary to our opinion. So having critical thinkers at the board that challenge that thinking is important. It's good for the board, especially if we're creating a new board, for our directors to have experience on effective boards. And in the interview process, talking to directors about their experience on boards and asking them, what boards have you been on that have been effective and which boards have been ineffective and why, can often provide you valuable information about whether somebody's going to serve as a good director for you. I've mentioned the family business sensitivity. They need that. The 5-year rule is just that, thinking about how long does it take for a director to actually become an insider. So there are some that feel like it's about that 5-year period where people start to become an insider because of how long they've been around and the relationships they've built. That's not a hard and fast rule, but it's a guideline to think about. We should always be thinking about how are people maintaining their objectivity? Are they continuing to challenge productively, etc. You may want a director who's been through some of the issues that you're going through. If we're going through a growth curve from 100 million to 200 million in sales, who's been through that? Is there a director that has fulfilled that role? One thing that many families have done, and it's not to discount the value that our advisors provide us, because they're often very critical players in the system, but we're already paying for our advisors' advice. And an advisor may be less willing to challenge because of their concern about losing their billings, whether it's a lawyer or accountant or etc. So we typically advise that you don't have your advisors on your board. You can get their input and opinion without them actually being a director. Open dissent is critical, and then we believe that you don't want somebody who's serving on more than 3 boards, especially if they have a full-time CEO role or some other senior role with a company, because they don't have enough time to serve all of those boards effectively. So just a few things to think about from a qualifications perspective. So open dissent, strong communicators, good understanding of business, and the ability to collaborate with management. And that can be very critical. If a director does not work well with their fellow directors or with the management team, it's going to be very hard for them to hold management's feet to the fire. You're going to end up with board dynamics where the directors are fighting with each other rather than holding management accountable. So you want to assemble a team that can work together to hold management accountable. So that includes having the family members who are ready to do that and thinking about what are the qualifications that those family members have to have, and then being clear about the non-family members and the qualifications that those folks have to have in order to fulfill that. So these are some of the things in our recent board compensation research we found that families used in terms of criteria, sorry about that, criteria for selecting a board member. So on the family side, the most critical factor in selecting board members is company ownership. So that goes along with the lines of, if you have enough shares you can vote yourself on, or if you're a big enough block, people want you on so that you're at the table. Interestingly enough, trust by extended family is also high on the list. And then we have a lot in the other category as well. So when we're looking at independent directors, expertise is obviously the highest one, but yet you still have to be trusted by family and then have a prior board experience. Those are the most important criteria that families are using in selecting independent outside directors. So we also looked at, do families have a written job description? So in the interest of holding board members accountable, are we clear with our board members about their duties? And so 30% of the people we surveyed, a little over 30%, said, yes, we have a job description for our board members, and it's accurate to what is required of a board member. About 8% said, we have a description, but it's not very accurate about what's required to be a board member. About a little under 35% said, no, we don't have a written job description, but we do have clear expectations. So the good news is that 65 to 70% of the families feel like there's an adequate understanding of the responsibility and duties of board members. But 25% do not have a written description and don't feel like expectations are clear. So that's a clear area where you need to do some cleanup work. So how do we find these directors? Now, what many of the families that haven't had independent outsiders on their board before will say, who would ever want to serve on our board? I have a family that's going through a search right now who has a senior Amazon executive who's interested in serving on the board of this $100 million company. So you'd be surprised about who might be interested in serving on your board, and don't discount yourself. People want to give back oftentimes when they're serving on boards, and so don't discount the type of people you might be able to attract. So you do want to develop a profile, and if you want a copy of a profile, we can share some examples of other families that they've circulated that's helped them generate candidates. So at the center, we can help you generate those candidates through our networks and relationships we have with directors associations. You can circulate your profile through your networks and industry associations, etc. And then, of course, you can hire a professional search firm. It's fairly expensive, but oftentimes can help you find good candidates. Then you have to have a process for evaluating the candidates. So typically you have a nominating committee that creates a list of questions that helps us compare and contrast the candidates that we're talking to. You do phone interviews and much like a normal job search process, work towards face-to-face interviews. And these are going to be different than hiring for an administrative assistant or a mid-level manager. It's higher level discussions, and it's more about are we a match than it is are you good enough to work for us. It's more of a conversation than a grilling, so to speak. And we also have to be prepared for sharing information with them and getting them on board once we've selected those directors. So we need to have a perspective about what are the operating procedures of the book. We'll want to have a non-disclosure agreement and board book that will help board members get up to speed as quickly as possible, and realize that it may take us talking to 10 to 15 people before we find the right mix of people that say yes, and that yes may be on that's where we both say yes. So there may be candidates that you want that decide that this isn't the right board seat for them, and it might be the reverse. You may have people that really want to serve on your board that you just don't think is a good fit. So just realize that you're going to whittle down and find the right person for you. So in the board manual, you typically want to share about the history, the industry, the board itself, the family, and understand the important family members, ownership structure, etc. You want a manual that helps people get up to speed and know how we operate as quickly as possible. The orientation process, that board book is the foundation of it. So a central place where a director can learn, the basics of what we need to know about the company, the family, the ownership structure, perhaps some of the trusts that are related to the ownership structure. We're going to want them to meet the senior executives, sometimes actually touring the facilities and seeing different operations, and that may take place over time. It may take place over the first year of their engagement. We also want them to meet the important family members and develop a relationship with the family so that when they hear about family issues at the board level, they know who's asking the question and how those questions are coming up. If they're not from our industry, we may want to give them some orientation from our industry, and don't get caught in the bias that if somebody's not from our industry, they can't possibly understand us. Again, that research that I referenced at the beginning, where industry and position weren't aligned with the value that they were providing, that it's their general business savvy and what they bring to the table is from outside the industry can often be extremely helpful. We may want to do some formal training as well around ethics or HR, any of those things. And sometimes we want to introduce them to customers, suppliers, and so that they can, again, get a deeper understanding of the industry and how we operate. So all of this is to say selecting them is important, but onboarding them in the right way and preparing them to serve the family in the right way is just as important as finding the right people, because we're going to spend some decent money on these people, so we want to make sure that we get the most out of them by getting them oriented as quickly as possible. Then we also want to evaluate the board. I think a lot of families fall short on saying, is our board doing the right job? Are they doing the right thing? Are they fulfilling the accountability question? Are they communicating with family? Are they holding regular meetings? Are the committees working well? Do we have a clear strategy? Are we evaluating the strategy? Are we looking at the important financial and legal issues? And are we achieving our financial goals? These are all areas where we can look at the board's performance. So many families will evaluate the board as a whole, and then some actually go to the step of providing feedback to each individual director about their performance and how they're living up to the expectations of a board member. I think board tenure is important, again, with that question of when does somebody become an insider. when you've been around long enough, sometimes you lose some of that objectivity. That's not to say everybody does that. But you want to review the board regularly and make sure we have the right people, not just for where we are today, but where we want to get to in the next 5 years. So we may have a director that served us very well for 5 or 10 years, and they provided great value, but their skill sets and their focus and ability may not be helpful in the next 5 years, the next 10 years of where we're going. So looking at our directors regularly and reviewing their performance. Are they engaged? Are they speaking up? Are they prepared when they come to board meetings? And making sure they're doing their job and have criteria for keep, let go decision making. And this last piece, serve at the pleasure of the owners. Whenever I serve on a board, I make it clear at the start. If ever the family feels I'm not serving them, all they have to do is ask, and I'll step down. So many families actually have a tenure written in with a board tenure of, say, 3 years, and limits on the number of terms you can use those if your family's a more rural-oriented culture that may fit. But I think any good director should be willing to step down at any point if the owners don't feel like they're serving their need. So just to give some oversight on kind of what we've learned the most effective boards do, they meet 4 to 6 times a year. If we're meeting less than 4 to 6 times, then we are often not meeting often enough to understand and hold accountability. If we're meeting more than 6 times, we're getting too much into operations. If we have a separate CEO and chairman, that increases performance. 2 outsiders to each family member. This is research. This was research on public companies, but that when there's a ratio of 2 outsiders to each family member in a public company scenario, that improves performance. Board diversity also, if we don't have a diverse board, it may reduce the likelihood of strategic change. The family needs to provide the board a clear sense of values, a vision for the family's relationship with the business. Why are we in business together? What businesses do we want to be in? And what are our ownership goals at a very high level? The family needs to create clear boundaries between the family and business and expectations for the company. And support the board-approved strategy. Families do this by creating a family strategy, which is a whole nother webinar, but it's a comprehensive articulation of our vision for the future of our family and our business, and the goals, strategies, and actions that will help us achieve that. The board should provide the family with the strategic plan, sharing industry and supplier information, the status of succession planning, and making sure that the family is aware of any important successes or concerns that may be percolating within the business. We can foster communication between the family and the board through having joint meetings, often dinners before the board meeting or before a family meeting where board members get to interact on an informal basis with family members. Some families provide board mentors to family members, so an independent outsider on the board may mentor high potential next gens. Often families will send a letter to the board about their expectations. The board will send a letter back to the family about what's happening, fostering that sense of communication. And this is obviously some discussions at the board level are confidential, so we're going to avoid sharing confidential information. So the last question I want to kind of address is one that many people ask is, what do we have to pay our board members? Now, this is data from our compensation study, and I will tell you that when you compare family businesses to non-family businesses, family businesses pay less than non-family businesses do for their boards. So they typically separate their board compensation into 2 things, an annual fee or retainer and then a per meeting fee. So when you look at the retainer portion of the business, of the compensation for a director, about 7% are over 50K, about 6% are 40 to 50K, so on and so forth. You can see these numbers, a little over 10% are in the 20K retainer range. So that's one component of the compensation, and when you look at this, it is correlated to size. So the smaller the company, obviously the lower the retainer. And then the per meeting fee ranges from in the 1K range to some families have per meeting fees over 5K. So that just gives you a quick and dirty kind of look at the range of pay. And in general, you can think about the larger our family business, the more we're going to have to pay independent directors. And then we'll also have to have a philosophy about, do family members get the same board fee, et cetera. In general, family members who are working for the company do not get a separate board fee. It's considered part of their compensation. We're really talking about family members who don't work for the company. Do they get the same board fee as independent directors? So if we're expecting them to perform at the same level as an independent director, certainly they should be compensated at the same level. So all of this is leading up to next year. We're going to launch the Governance Institute, which is preparing family members for board service. It's going to be similar to our Next Generation Leadership Institute and our stewardship program, but it'll be exclusively focused on becoming a board member and what are my responsibilities in being a board member and how do I prepare myself for that. And it will actually include mock board sessions where we take important business case studies and actually do mock board meetings where you get to interact with real business situations and experience a mock board meeting. So it's going to be a great program. If you're interested, please email us. You can email me at akeyt@luc.edu or submit something through our website to get more information on the Governance Institute. But appreciate the time that you've all spent with us this afternoon. If you'd like a recording for other family members who aren't with you today, you can get those. And here are a few more resources on boards that may help you as you think about issues surrounding boards. So thanks again for participating in our webinar today, and we'll look forward to seeing you all soon at Family Business Center events. Thanks so much.